Jean Martin felt a hand on her waist before she saw who it belonged to. She was sitting beside Dean in their booth at the Sands Lounge, laughing at something he'd just said, when a man's hand suddenly closed around her waist. Not friendly, not accidental, intentional. Her breath caught. She looked up. The man standing over their booth was in his 40s, wearing a dark suit, his hair slicked back. His face looked like it had seen too many fights, and his eyes were unfocused, drunk, very drunk. But beneath the haze of alcohol was something else, menace. Jean didn't know who he was, but she knew the type. She'd lived in Las Vegas long enough to recognize danger when it stood in front of her. His hand remained on her waist, squeezing slightly, possessive, like she belonged to him, like she was something he could touch without permission. Jean glanced at Dean. Dean had changed. The easygoing, laughing man from moments earlier was gone. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the man's hand, on Jean's waist. She had only seen that look a few times in their marriage. The lounge seemed quieter. People were watching. Jean felt the tension rolling off Dean and wanted to stop it before it went any further, to say it was fine, to tell Dean to ignore it, to suggest they leave. But before she could speak, the drunk man did. "You're a beautiful woman," he said. "Too beautiful to be with this clown." He meant Dean, and his hand was still on her waist. In that moment, Jean Martin understood that whatever happened in the next 10 seconds was going to change everything. To understand why that night was so dangerous, you need to understand 3 things: who Vincent Morello was, what Las Vegas was like in 1963, and what Jean Martin meant to Dean. Vincent Morello was an enforcer for the Chicago outfit, not a boss, not a top man, but dangerous enough. Vincent's job was simple: collect debts, solve problems, and, when necessary, make people disappear. By 1963, he'd been in Las Vegas for about 5 years, working primarily at casinos tied to the Chicago outfit, the Sands, the Desert Inn, and the Stardust. He spent his time at high-stakes tables, watching for cheaters, collecting from those who owed money, and handling situations that couldn't be ignored. Vincent was known for 3 things: a short temper, a serious drinking problem, and a tendency to get handsy with women, especially when drunk. Casino staff learned quickly to steer clear. Female employees avoided him entirely. Vincent believed that his mob connections gave him the right to do as he pleased, to touch, to speak, and to take. And in 1963 Vegas, he was usually right. You didn't challenge the mob. You didn't report them. You didn't confront them. You survived by staying invisible and hoping they didn't notice you. Vegas in 1963 was a world of contrasts. The glitz, the shows, the celebrities, the luxury, it was all real. But beneath the glamour ran a hidden web of mob control. The Chicago outfit didn't outright own the casinos. That would have been too obvious. But they held secret stakes, controlled skimming operations, influenced management decisions, and even shaped the entertainment. If the mob wanted you performing, you performed. If they didn't, you didn't work. Dean Martin understood all of this. He'd grown up around tough men in Steubenville, Ohio. His father's barbershop was a hangout for local mob figures. Dean knew how to navigate them: respect, professionalism, but never submission. Jean, however, was different. Jean was off limits, not because of any mob rule, but because of Dean. Dean had married Jean in 1949. She was his second wife, and together they had 3 children. To Dean, she was untouchable. Dean, Paul, Ricci, and Gina. And Dean loved her, really loved her. Dean's public persona was the cool, detached guy who didn't seem to care too deeply about anything. But with Jean, that persona vanished. He was devoted, protective, almost possessive, not controlling, but in a clear, unshakable way. This woman is mine, and I will protect her with everything I have. Dean's friends knew the rules. You could tease Dean about his drinking, his laziness, his persona, but you didn't disrespect Jean. Not in front of Dean. Not ever. The night of November 15th, 1963, started like any other. Dean had just finished his 10 p.m. show in the Sands Copa Room. Typical Dean Martin show. Singing, jokes, casual interactions with the audience. The crowd loved it. After the performance, Dean changed out of his stage clothes and met Jean in the lounge. They had been married 14 years, with 3 children and busy lives. Quiet moments together were rare, and tonight was supposed to be one of those. Just the two of them, sharing drinks, talking, being a normal couple. The lounge was moderately crowded, about 200 people. Some were guests who had just seen Dean's show, others casino patrons taking a break from gambling. A few were locals who frequented the sands. Dean and Jean took a corner booth. Dean ordered a scotch, Jean a white wine. They talked about the kids, Dean's upcoming tour schedule, and ordinary life. For about 45 minutes, it was perfect. Then Vincent Morello walked in. Vincent had been drinking since early afternoon. He had lost heavily at the blackjack tables, about $15,000 of his boss's money, not his own. Drunk, angry, and looking for something to make himself feel better, he spotted Jean across the lounge, a beautiful blonde, elegant and classy, sitting with a man he didn't immediately recognize. His drunk brain made a decision. I'm gonna talk to her. Vincent wobbled unsteadily across the lounge. People noticed him coming. Some recognized him, others moved aside. He reached Dean and Jean's booth and looked at Jean. Up close, she was even more beautiful. Without asking, without introducing himself, without any social grace, Vincent placed his hand on her waist. Dean froze. Jean's entire body went rigid. Dean's reaction was instant. His head snapped toward Vincent, eyes locked on the man's hand on his wife's waist. Around them, the lounge began to quiet. Conversations stopped. People were watching. Vincent, oblivious to the tension, squeezed Jean's waist slightly and leaned in, his breath heavy with alcohol. You're a beautiful woman, too beautiful to be with this clown. He gestured dismissively at Dean with his free hand. That's when Vincent finally looked at Dean, really looked at him, and recognition flickered across his drunk face. Dean Martin. Oh. Vincent's hand remained on Jean's waist. The lounge grew quieter. More people were noticing. More people were watching. Dean still hadn't moved. He sat frozen, staring at Vincent's hand. His jaw was clenched. His entire body was tense. Jean looked at Dean. She had seen that look before, maybe 3 times in their entire marriage. It was the look he got when something crossed a line, when something threatened his family. She placed her hand gently on his arm, a warning. Dean, don't. It's not worth it. But Dean wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on Vincent's hand, still on his wife's waist. 10 seconds had passed since Vincent touched Jean, maybe 15, and in that time, Dean made his decision. He stood up slowly, deliberately. No sudden movements, no rush, just rising from the booth until he was face to face with Vincent. Dean was about 6 feet tall, Vincent maybe 5'9". The difference didn't really matter. What mattered was what Dean did next. He stepped fully between Vincent and Jean, blocking him completely. One arm reached back instinctively, finding Jean's hand and holding her, anchoring her behind him. Then Dean looked directly at Vincent. Not angry, not threatening, just calm, steady, unmistakably Dean Martin. The lounge was nearly silent now. 50 people watching, maybe more. Dean said nothing at first. He simply stared. And Vincent, drunk as he was, felt something unfamiliar creep in. Uncertainty. Then Dean spoke. His voice was quiet, calm, but it carried. You've got your hand on something that doesn't belong to you. Vincent's hand was still reaching for Jean, or trying to be, except Dean's body was now firmly in the way. Vincent forced a laugh. Hey, Dean, no disrespect, I was just... Remove your hand. Dean didn't raise his voice, but it hardened, cold, final. Vincent glanced at Dean, then at the growing crowd, then at his own hand still hovering where it didn't belong. He was drunk, but not stupid. He could feel the shift. This wasn't going the way he'd imagined. Come on, Vincent said. I'm just being friendly. Dean took a single step closer. Now they were inches apart. Dean's body remained solidly between Vincent and Jean, protective, immovable. His voice dropped lower, meant for Vincent alone. "I'm going to say this once. Remove your hand, walk away, and we forget this ever happened." A pause. "But if you touch my wife again, if you even look at her the wrong way, I don't care who you work for. I don't care who your friends are. I will make sure you regret it." Dean's eyes never left Vincent's face, and in those eyes, Vincent saw something that sobered him faster than any drink could. This wasn't the laid-back, charming Dean Martin from the stage. This was Dino Crocetti from Steubenville, Ohio, the kid who grew up in a rough neighborhood, who boxed to defend himself, who knew how to handle bullies. Vincent Morello, enforcer for the Chicago outfit, a man who had intimidated hundreds, suddenly realized he was in over his head. He pulled his hand back. "Hey, no problem, Dean. I was just—" "Walk away." Dean's voice was still calm, quiet, but absolute. Vincent took a step back, then another. Trying to save face, he muttered, "Yeah, whatever. Got better things to do anyway." But everyone watching knew the truth. Vincent Morello had just backed down in public, in front of dozens of witnesses. He turned and left the lounge, forcing a casual stride, forcing a look of control, but it was a performance no one bought. Dean stayed for a moment longer, making sure Vincent was really gone, making sure the threat was gone. Then he turned to Jean. His face softened, the hardness, the tension disappeared, replaced by the man she knew, the man who would always protect her. The protective intensity in Dean's eyes softened. "You okay?" Jean nodded, though her hands were still shaking slightly. "Dean, you shouldn't have. He works for—" "I know who he works for," Dean said quietly. "I don't care." He slid back into the booth, wrapped an arm around Jean and pulled her close. Slowly, the lounge returned to its normal volume. Conversations resumed, but everyone was talking about what they had just seen. The bartender, Joey Sullivan, came over with 2 fresh drinks and set them on the table. "On the house, Mr. Martin." Dean nodded his thanks. Joey leaned in just enough to be heard. "That was either the bravest thing or the stupidest thing I've ever seen." Dean smiled faintly. "Probably both." By the next day, word had spread through Vegas, through the entertainment crowd, through casino workers, even through mob circles. Then the phone call came. A senior figure from the Chicago outfit, higher up the chain than Vincent. "Dean, I heard about last night." Dean stiffened. "Here it comes." "Vincent was out of line, way out of line. He had no right to touch your wife. He's been told that won't happen again." Dean was genuinely surprised. "Okay, thank you." "But listen," the voice said. "Next time something like this happens, come to us first. Don't handle it yourself. You got lucky last night. Vincent was drunk and stupid. If it had been someone else, someone less drunk, someone more violent, it could have gone very differently." "Understood." "Your wife is off limits. We've made that clear. Vincent knows it. Everyone knows it. But Dean, be careful. You stood up to a mob guy in front of witnesses. That's not something we can let become a habit. Not for you, not for anyone." The message was unmistakable. You won this time. Don't push your luck. Dean understood. He'd crossed a dangerous line and gotten away with it only because Vincent had been so obviously wrong that even the mob couldn't defend him. But Dean didn't care about warnings or risks. When it came to Jean, there was no calculation, no weighing of consequences. Someone touched his wife, he handled it. Period. Years later, in 1980s, Jean Martin gave an interview about that night. "Were you scared?" the interviewer asked. Jean thought for a moment. "At first, yes. When that man grabbed me, I was terrified. But the moment Dean stood up, the moment he put himself between me and him, I wasn't scared anymore. I knew Dean would protect me no matter what it cost him." "Did you know the man worked for the mob?" "Not until later, but Dean knew, and he didn't care.
That's who he was with his family, with the people he loved. No compromise. You didn't touch them. You didn't threaten them. And if you did, Dean handled it. The story of Dean and Vincent became part of Las Vegas lore, not printed in newspapers, but whispered, respected, remembered. Because Dean Martin did something almost nobody did in 1963 Vegas. He stood up to the mob and won. Not with violence, not with threats, but with sheer presence, with the willingness to risk himself for someone he loved. On stage, Dean Martin was the laid-back, carefree entertainer, but when it mattered, when someone he loved was threatened, he was immovable, fearless, absolute. Vincent Morello left Las Vegas shortly after the incident, reportedly reassigned to Chicago. Whether because of Gene or other factors, nobody knew for sure, but Dean's message had been heard loud and clear. You don't touch my family. I don't care who you are. I don't care who you work for. You don't touch them. In 1963 Las Vegas, where the mob controlled nearly everything, that message, delivered by a singer and entertainer, was revolutionary. Dean Martin protected his wife in 10 seconds. 10 seconds that could have ended his career. 10 seconds that could have ended his life. But 10 seconds that proved far more important than fame or safety. When someone Dean loved was threatened, nothing else mattered.